Hello and welcome. Thank you everyone for coming to this session. I hope there's lots of people from Treasury today because we have the industry here to tell you what you should be putting in your payments vision. It's interesting that I'm moderating this panel because I don't think about this from a FinTech perspective. I think about this question from a consumer and a business as an end consumer perspective. I run a small business and I sit on the financial services consumer panel. But today I will try and stick to task, not least because I have the FinTech industry in the room, and you probably want to hear from your fellow industry participants what Treasury should be thinking about in its national payments vision. To discuss this, just briefly, I have Myles Stephenson, the founder and CEO of Modulr, which does embedded payments, probably much more, but I'm giving everyone a small briefing. Victor Mithouard from Numeral, which does payment infrastructure, and Samina Hussain-Letch, sorry, without my glasses, I can't read, from Square, which is a tech company. Some of us know it for payments, but it's now a tech company. So I want to start by asking whether the FinTech industry, and it is the FinTech industry, needs a payments vision, a national payments vision. And I'm going to start with you, Myles, because you're next to me.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think the answer is yes, but I think we need to be very careful about what the yes is. It needs to be a qualified yes. And for me, it's thinking about the problem we're trying to solve and what is that problem that we have today. And from my perspective and Modulr's perspective, and what I see in the market and have seen over many years is that there's some amazing, fabulous things that have happened in the UK, continue to happen, and we need to make sure we see them through. And we do that in a coordinated way and a consistent way. So there's so many examples of whether it's back to the debit card usage in the UK that's phenomenal, open banking innovation, direct access to the Bank of England and payment systems that non-bank financial institutions like ourselves have got. There's so many examples. What I worry about is the lack of, if you want to call it a vision, as to how all of that comes together in a coordinated way, and we finish it off and we see it through to the end. So there's some really good examples in each of those where I think we've started, but have we finished? So things like faster payments, for example. Do we need a new core infrastructure, or do we need a dispute resolution system and be able to manage fraud in a proper coordinated way in the way a payment scheme does? Or with open banking, do we need a commercial model to ensure that it actually works across the industry? So I think we've done some amazing things, let's finish them off properly. And for me, that's what the vision could be about, is bringing all of that together in a really cohesive way that really drives the UK forward. And I think also, as we were talking about, what are we trying to solve for? Is it for the UK, or is it for a broader thing? And therefore, who in the UK are we trying to solve this for? And you said for FinTechs, but then FinTechs, what are they trying to solve for? UK businesses, citizens, and improving their lives.
Or their investors, yes.
Or their investors, yes.
Victor, you come from France, which is something of a dirigiste country. It's famous for being so. And payments is one of those interesting industries where you can have a very center-driven approach. We've seen some very successful center-driven approaches for those markets in India and Brazil recently. And less centrally driven approaches elsewhere. Where do you think this payments vision should sit in that spectrum?
You had to start to pick on the French.
I did.
So I think the point that Myles made about the fact that this vision needs to help translate payments into reality is a really good one, because payments, from our perspective at Numeral, it's an infrastructure, like something very fundamental like nuclear. It's something you need to have proper focus, proper investment going into it in order for the broader population to reap the benefit of very low marginal cost. I think the vision of everyone in Europe, in the UK, is that the cost of payments is going to tend towards zero processing cost. That's going to make society better off. It needs to also go towards instant, because that's going to free liquidity, which currently is still held in the payment system where they're not instant. That's going to fuel GDP, it's going to fuel growth, it's going to fuel a lot of things. If you don't have that vision, I think you will necessarily struggle to align infrastructure with regulation. And the two really have to come and get together hand in hand for the payments infrastructure to actually modernize. it's not a short-term vision. It's something that needs to happen over 3, 4, 5, 6 years. 6 years. And I think that having a clear view where you want to land into 6 years, to mobilize the different stakeholders, which are all extremely talented. I have the experience of already doing this. It's needed to actually mobilize them toward the same direction so that you don't have operational problems, politics that gets in the way of a better payment infrastructure for everybody.
So you're a French diplomat then, because you didn't really answer whether it was dirigiste or not dirigiste.
Yeah, I try to avoid that question. We love kings.
Okay, so Samina, you work for a US tech company here in the UK. From your perspective, as that British employee or UK-based employee of an American tech company that's made its European home in London, what do you need to see? Why do you need a payments vision? Why do you think the UK needs a payments vision?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And you know, Square is a global company. We're a US-based company. We started off 15 years ago, and we've been incredibly successful in launching into new markets. And we've done that without a national payments vision. We've done that with very complex policies and regimes in each of those different markets and regulation. But the industry has moved on a lot, and the payments industry is an industry that moves incredibly fast, which I'm sure we all know that. So I think if we look at where we're at today, and we look at the UK and why organisations like Square come into a market which is incredibly complex, and I say that having spent a lot of my career out in Australia, coming into the UK, it's an incredibly complex, competitive landscape with a lot of regulation. And I think what's happened is a lot of that innovation and investment, and whether that's US companies coming into the UK or homegrown companies in the UK, we've seen policy develop around that. And it's happened very haphazardly. So I think it's actually a really exciting time right now for us to take a step back and set a very intentional vision for what that future looks like. Whether that's going to create alignment, whether that's necessary, I agree from an infrastructure perspective, that's really important, because overcoming very cumbersome domestic infrastructure can make it really hard for external companies to come and enter the UK, or new companies to grow in the UK and thrive. And so I think it's actually a really exciting moment for us to take a very intentional view, work closely with the regulators here to make sure that we're setting a vision that is future-proofed, that is flexible, and that is also right-sized regulation to make sure that innovation continues to flourish in the UK.
Okay. You said work with regulators to ensure that the vision does, but Treasury is not the regulator in this instance. We have 3 other regulators regulating the payments sector, who presumably will be inputting in some ways to the payments vision, but rather like the industry might be more net takers of the payments vision when it comes out. Can I ask you all individually to tell me one particular thing you would like to see solved for the fintech industry? Not for people like me, not for the UK writ large, but maybe those two are common, and that's super. But one particular thing that you would like to see in this payments vision, or one particular thing you'd like it to solve for, one friction in your life. I'll start with Victor because he's looking ready, poised.
I was giving my other panelists time. I think the one thing that, from a fintech perspective, we work with a lot of fintechs, and we've realized that they can only really realize their value creation of the business model they're doing if they start working well with banking partners, like regular, legit, tier 1 banking partners. I think the role of the banks within this stream of change and this waterfall of infrastructure modernization is often not talked about enough. And I think a lot of things are being asked of banks from a fraud perspective, from an open banking perspective, from an access to schemes perspective. And they don't, I think they complain, they do, because regulation forces them, but they don't go all the way because they're also the place of banks within this broader payments vision. I don't think it's as clear as it could be. Banks as an enabler, banks as a distributor of these services. So what I'd love to have in that vision is clarifying the role of banks within this waterfall of innovation. How can they support more companies while still doing the really important role of keeping consumers safe, ensuring that we operate at the right compliance standards? That's part of...
That's banks' job, not FinTech's job.
It's both. It's both. And it's a really good question. I think FinTech needs to raise the bar at which they operate as well. I think it should be a joint endeavor. It's a team sport, but I think clarifying who does what, who is expected to do what in a clearer manner would be better for innovation. I think something that other countries like Brazil have done extremely well.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely seems like a moment of transition. If there's a Commonweal Garden Bank in the room that would like to speak up at this point, they're very welcome to bravely raise their hand. Samina, what would you like to see?
Yeah, if I think about the UK landscape, we've got around 5 million businesses, small business owners like yourself, Natasha, and we have what I would love to see through this payments vision is actually a formidable alternative to everyday payments, and to see. And the reason why I bring it back to small business owners is that having optionality through a really strong domestic payment system and really leveraging the open banking rails that we've developed and invested in, it's a world-leading open banking system, but really see that level up to a formidable account-to-account payment alternative to what we have with the payment networks will help drive down cost for small business owners by having an alternative option. So I'd really love to see that develop through the national payments vision and the strategy that comes with that, to see a formidable account-to-account payments option.
So what specifically, just to dive into that a bit further, what specifically does Treasury need to put in place, propose, require, demand from the industry or what infrastructure does it need to put in place to make account-to-account the proper viable option you're hoping for?
Yeah. So I don't think the national payments vision is going to be the silver bullet to deliver that. I think it's making sure that we have a clear vision that's going to ensure investment in the domestic rails is going to be really important. And what actually needs to happen from that is that we have a strategy for our open banking platform, that we have the infrastructure that we need to see is around the commercials. We need to see better infrastructure around how fraud is managed on that platform and network rules, essentially. So I don't think we're going to see that from the national payments vision and from Treasury, but they're going to really help set a North Star, and that's about having optionality, and that's about having a formidable domestic alternative payments method. And that's what we're, if we're talking to Treasury in the room today, that's what I would love to see.
Is there anyone from Treasury? I hope you're all Treasury, really. There's someone laughing, so embarrassedly, so hopefully they are. Of course, you mentioned the investment in the rails, and we talked about banks earlier. And I think to date, the investment has been from banks, and some banks, if they were here in the room, might say, and the profits have been accruing to the FinTech sector. So there are going to be some things beyond stating this is a problem that needs to be solved to sort of get to a proper level afterwards. But good points all. Myles, you're poised to proclaim what you'd like to see.
It's a really, really good question. And if I'm honest, I'm struggling with if there's a real specific points, because you have a laundry list of lots of things that you want on that list. But for me, if I'm trying to encapsulate it in one area, it's sort of finishing off the job of leveling the playing field, because I sort of agree with Victor a bit, but also disagree in terms of, yes, we need to be clear on the bank's role, but part of the journey that we set off on in the UK, and have done an amazing job, and it also is aligned with Europe as well, is enabling broader competition and opening the market up to non-bank financial institutions, which then can fill these gaps and fill those roles. And we've done that in a great way to an extent, but we need to really drive through and finish it through properly. So, and it gets down to challenges where we set the vision versus some of the detail, because it is really down in the detail of, for example, creating true competition in faster payments not only requires the direct access that we have, technical and settlement access, but it requires some really thorny issues around liquidity to be solved at the Bank of England. Now, we need to be able to solve those, because then it solves the problem that Victor is describing, because then you've got true level playing field, true opportunity. So for me, it's being able to somehow encompass in this vision that you finish off this leveling of the playing field, so you actually get true competition, which opens the market up, which then enables fintechs to be served in the way you're describing, but also then enables those fintechs to drive the value out into the market and become scaled. And I think these, for me, it is a journey, because where the UK started off really well, it's created the innovation, created the ideas. People are now getting to scale, and it's now because we're getting to scale that you're into the next level of challenge and issues, and that to me is where we then need to focus on.
So it's positive.
It's positive. I think it is, and I think if you look at the Future of Payments report, I think whilst it says there's a lack of a vision, we need a vision, but if you read it, there's a lot of positives in there, and I think one thing we absolutely should not do, which is a sort of very British thing to do, is sort of say it's all a disaster, it's all negative, it's all a problem, versus recognise the successes and build on those successes. I think it would be a real shame if we just ignored all of the success and all the things that have happened and try to just reinvent it and start again. That would set us back massively. So I think we have to work out how to recognise we're here and we're trying to just go further.
Well, I'm always...
That probably doesn't answer your question. With
it doesn't, no.
But tries to give some context of where I think we need to go.
But I think that was general, and that general answer was very helpful. But I would disagree with you on this sort of British embarrassment. I think the British embarrassment is nowhere to be seen when it comes to payments. You never see anything on payments come out of the UK, whether it's the bank or Treasury, that fails to say that we're a leader in payments, which brings me on to the international question. We know of some very big economies around the world that have really quite third-rate payment systems which have born really some quite first-rate payments companies. And we have one on the stage here. And we also know some developing countries that have produced some first-rate payment systems for their markets. And then we have Europe, which does huge amounts of things, and a lot of it is still on paper. And I wonder to what extent you three think that the UK needs to be thinking about the payments vision as a competitive weapon, to make sure that the likes of Samina stay here, to project itself on the world stage. Maybe I should turn to Victor on that one. Or just because you need to have a good national payments environment to foster growth, or is it a mixture of all of those things? And I'll start with Victor, because what better than hearing from a Frenchman what British should do?
Definitely getting picked on today. I think that the starting point is probably to say that payment systems are core to how a country operates. Like, you do not have a payment systems go down, your country stops. Payments are the way that you exchange value without friction, and you cannot do this if your payment system doesn't work. So I think as a start, any payment system, any thinking about payments has to include an element of sovereignty, because it is an element of sovereignty. It is sovereign. Like, it's critical to your infrastructure, again, just like electricity is. So I don't think you can discard that fact, and when you actually put a policy forward, when it comes in a vision forward, it has to work first for your first servants, which are your UK consumers. Then, when you think about fintechs, I think fintechs are also enablers of the well-being of fintechs. I think it was a number of the country. Sorry, there was a number that was quoted yesterday that 86% of people in the UK are currently using fintech services. So, fintechs definitely play a part in bettering the lives of people in the UK, and they play a part in the competitiveness of the UK economy. So that's not. I think the two effects, I think, have to be thought through in parallel. But first and foremost, payment systems are sovereign, and I think they need to remain so. In terms of the way you think, to your initial questions about how to take inspirations from outside and bring it into the UK, I'm 100% with Myles there. I think when we looking from France on the other side of the channel, for certain things we have stars in our eyes when we think about the UK payment systems. Like open banking was invented in the UK in its form and shape, and I think when we look at the US, the way we look about these financial innovators in the US, you're also filling an infrastructure gap that the US is not managing to fill at a systemic level. Like, US is not great at infrastructure, it's great at a lot of other things. The UK has done a lot of things and leaped forward. Now,
so maybe we should have terrible infrastructure and allow Square and PayPal and Stripe to build up on our shores instead of...
That's a very tricky question to answer, but personally, I'd say no. That said, there are things that needs to be modernized. If you look at just at the aging of the infrastructure, something that was launched in 2016, that was launched in 2000, cannot be fit for purpose for today's economy. The one that comes to mind is BACS as a system. You know, it is, with all its merits, still highly inefficient. If you look at direct debit systems across the world, it can be massively modernized and a lot of value can be created there. So I guess it's more, I just answer like Myles said, it's cherry picking, I think first having a clear line of policy as to whether it's driven by the government top down or it's like the UK have done it until now, which is a lot with private partnerships and a lot of experts in Treasury. You have to choose, potentially. Yeah. And the second is what needs to be changed. Why are you going to focus your efforts for maximum value? And a lot of things are to be amplified, taken to the very end of the thinking rather than replaced, in my view.
I think there's an opportunity there, but I think there's a danger point as well. And it is interesting, the parallels of the US market of leave it to the market, and the infrastructure is poor, but it provides opportunity in other ways, versus, say, India and Brazil, and actually specify it, build it, invest in it, almost government-owned in some way, but drive it. I think there's a danger of being caught in the middle. So do we want a sort of national infrastructure, and if so, plays to your point about who's really going to pay for it, if it's national infrastructure, versus is it actually commercially owned and commercially invested in? And I think you have to be clear of, if it's a mixed model, where does that really land, and who's funding and who's paying for it?
Those are difficult questions to answer, but certainly the US example, when you have a lot of people paying Walmart an awful lot of money for cashing their checks, and yet you're giving birth to fantastic companies like, I'm not advertising. But Samina, you've spent some time abroad, which is very open-minded of you. Australia, small, wealthy, sophisticated economy. What would you bring back from there that could be useful for Britain's payments vision?
I mean, so I spent a lot of my career out in Australia. I've been back in the UK for a year now. And comparing the two, the UK is an incredibly sophisticated payments market. But what comes with that as well is a lot of competition, a lot of regulation, and some fragmentation as well, even for a very small country. In size, and you compare to Australia, which is incredibly far away, a lot smaller, but a real hub for innovation. It was one of the leading markets for contactless adoption. It was actually the leading market for contactless adoption. When Square launched in Australia 7 years ago, we were the world first to do PIN on glass, which is actually, putting your card pin onto a mobile phone. And so, there's a lot of appetite from consumers, there's a lot of appetite from businesses, and I think that comes from a less complex payments landscape, but also a more...
Less complex from the regulatory standpoint?
Well, just more generally for consumers and businesses, it's less complex. There's not as many players, it's not as fragmented, but what comes with that is a little bit more simple regulation as well. That's very much proportionate to the risk profile of the players that are out there. And I think that's something that I think would be really important to learn from and bring back to the UK is how do we take this opportunity with setting a national payments vision to make sure that it is delivering something that is proportionate. I think that becomes very difficult for fintech players, especially emerging fintech players or scaling players, is that how does that regulation and that environment foster something that ensures, stability, but is proportionate to, the players that are here. So I would love to see that come into the UK.
Brilliant. Well, we've come to the end of our session. I hope all you officials from Treasury have taken copious notes about what the fintech industry needs from you. If you want to know about what consumers would like, do give me a call. But thank you, everyone, and thank you most of all to the panelists. Thank you.